Chapter 8 of Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 8 Right of Way. The look of blank astonishment which spread over Copplestone's face on hearing this announcement seemed to afford his companion great amusement, and she laughed merrily as she signed to him to turn back towards the woods. "All the same," she observed, "I know how to steal a countermarch on Master Chatfield. Come along you shan't be disappointed." "Does your cousin know of that?" asked Copplestone. "Are those his orders?" Audrey's lips curled a little, and she laughed again, but this time the laughter was cynical. "I don't think it much matters whether my cousin knows or not," she said. "He's the nominal Squire of Scarhaven, but everybody knows that the real overlord is Peter Chatfield. Peter Chatfield does everything. And he hates me. He won't have had such a pleasant moment for a long time as he had this morning when he took my key away from me and warned me off." "But why you?" asked Copplestone. "Oh, Peter is deep!" she said. "Peter, no doubt, knew that you came to see us last night. Peter knows all that goes on in Scarhaven. And he put things together, and decided that I might act as your cicerone over the Keep and the ruins. And so there you are." "Why should he object to my visiting the Keep?" demanded Copplestone. "That's obvious he considers you a spy," replied Audrey. "And there may be reasons why he doesn't desire your presence in those ancient regions. But we'll go there all the same, if you don't mind breaking rules and defying Peter." "Not I," said Copplestone. "Hang Peter! There are people who firmly believe that Peter Chatfield should have been hanged long since," she remarked quietly. "I'm one of them. Chatfield is a bad old man thoroughly bad. But I'll circumvent him in this, anyhow. I know how to get into the Keep in spite of him and of his locks and bolts. There's a big curtain wall, 20 feet high, all round the Keep, but I know where there's a hole in it, behind some bushes, and we'll get in there. Come along." She led him up the same path through the woods along which Bassett Oliver had gone, according to Ewbank's account. It wound through groves of fir and pine until it came out on a plateau, in the midst of which, surrounded by a high irregular wall, towered at the angles and buttressed all along its length, stood Scarhaven Keep. And there, at the head of a path which evidently led up from the big house, stood Chatfield, angry and threatening. Beyond him, distributed at intervals about the other paths which converged on the plateau, were other men, obviously estate labourers, who appeared to be mounting guard over the forbidden spot. "Now there's going to be a row between me and Chatfield," murmured Audrey. "You play spectator don't say a word leave it to me. We are on our rights along this path take no notice of Peter." But Chatfield was already bearing down on them, his solemn featured face dark with displeasure. He raised his voice while he was yet a dozen yards away. "I thought I'd told you as you wasn't to come near these here ruins," he said, addressing Audrey in a fashion which made Copplestone's fingers itch to snatch the oak staff from the agent and lay it freely about his person. "My orders was to that there effect, and when I give orders I mean 'em to be obeyed. You'll turn straight back where you came from, miss, and in future do as I instruct. Do you hear that, now?" "If you expect me to keep quiet or dumb under that sort of thing," whispered Copplestone, bending towards Audrey, "you're very much mistaken in me. I shall give this fellow a lesson in another minute if " "Well, wait another minute, then," said Audrey, who had continued to walk forward, steadily regarding the agent's threatening figure. "Let me talk a little first I'm enjoying it. Are you addressing me, Mr. Chatfield?" she went on in her sweetest accents. "I hear you speaking, but I don't know if you are speaking to me. If so, you needn't shout." "You know very well who I'm a speaking to," growled Chatfield. "I told you you wasn't to come near these ruins it's forbidden by order. You'll take yourself off, and that there young man with you. We want no paid spies hereabouts." "If you speak to me like that again I'll knock you down!" exclaimed Copplestone, stepping forward before Audrey could stop him. "Or to this lady either. Stand aside, will you?" Chatfield twisted on his heel with a surprising agility. Not to stand aside, but to wave his arm to the men who stood here and there behind him. "Here, you!" he shouted. "Here, this way, all of you! This here fellow's threatening me with assault. You lay a finger on me, you young snapper, and I'll have you in the lock up in 10 minutes. Stand between us, you men. He's for knocking me down. Now then," he went on, as the bodyguard got between him and Copplestone, "off you go, out of these grounds, both of you, quick! I'll have no defiance of my orders from neither gel nor boy, man nor woman. Out you go now, or you'll be put out." But Audrey continued to advance, still watching the agent. "You're under a mistake, Mr. Chatfield," she said calmly. "You will observe that Mr. Copplestone and I are on this path. You know very well that this is a public footpath, with a proper and legal right of way from time immemorial. You can't turn us off it, you know, without exposing yourself to all sorts of pains and penalties. You men know that, too," she continued, turning to the labourers and dropping her bantering tone. "You all know this is a public footpath, so stand out of our way, or I'll summon every one of you." The last words were spoken with so much force and decision that the three labourers involuntarily moved aside. But Chatfield hastened to oppose Audrey's progress, planting himself in front of a wicket gate which there stood across the path, and he laughed sneeringly. "And where would you find money to take summonses out?" he said, with a look of contempt. "I should think you and your mother's something better to do with your bit o' money than that. Now then, no more words back you turn." Copplestone's temper had been gradually rising during the last few minutes. Now, at the man's carefully measured taunts, he let it go. Before Chatfield or the labourer saw what he was at, he sprang on the agent's big form, grasped him by the neck with one hand, twisted his oak staff away from him with the other, flung him headlong on the turf, and raised the staff threateningly. "Now," he said, "beg Miss Greyle's pardon instantly, or I'll split your wicked old head for you. Quick, man I mean it!" Before Chatfield, moaning and groaning, could find his voice capable of words, Marston Greyle, pale and excited, came round a corner of the ruins. "What's this? What's all this?" he demanded. "Here, yon sir, what are you doing with that stick? What " "I'm about to chastise your agent for his scoundrelly insolence to your cousin," retorted Copplestone with cheerful determination. "Now then, my man, quick! I always keep my word." "Hand the stick to Mr. Marston Greyle, Mr. Copplestone," said Audrey in her demurest manner. "I'm sure he would beat Chatfield soundly if he had heard what he said to me his cousin." "Thank you, but I'm in possession," said Copplestone, grimly. "Mr. Marston Greyle can kick him when I've thrashed him. Now then, are you going to beg Miss Greyle's pardon, you hoary sinner?" "What on earth is it all about?" exclaimed Greyle, obviously upset and afraid. "Chatfield, what have you been saying? Go away, you men, go away, all of you, at once. Mr. Copplestone, don't hit him. Audrey, what is it? Hang it all, I seem to have nothing but bother. It's most annoying. What is it, I say?" "It is merely, Marston, that your agent there, after trying to turn Mr. Copplestone and myself off this public footpath, insulted me with shameful taunts about my mother's poverty," replied Audrey. "That's all. Whereupon, as you were not here to do it, Mr. Copplestone promptly and very properly knocked him down. And now is Mr. Copplestone to punish him, or will you?" Copplestone, keeping a sharp eye on the groaning and sputtering agent, contrived at the same time to turn a corner of it on Marston Greyle. That momentary glance showed him much. The Squire was mortally afraid of his man. That was certain as that they were there. He stood, a picture of vexation and indecision, glancing furtively at Chatfield, then at Audrey, and evidently hating to be asked to take a side. "Confound it all, Chatfield!" he suddenly burst out. "Why don't you mind what you're saying? It's all very well, Audrey, but you shouldn't have come along here, especially with strangers. The fact is, I'm so upset about this Oliver affair that I'm going to have a thorough search and examination of the Keep and the ruins, and of course we can't allow any one inside the grounds while it's going on. You should have kept to Chatfield's orders." "And since when has a Greyle of Scarhaven kept to a servant's orders?" interrupted Audrey. with a sneer that sent the blood rushing to the Squire's face. "Never! Until this present régime, I should think. Orders, indeed! From an agent! I wonder what the last Squire of Scarhaven would have said to a proposition like that? Mr. Copplestone, you've punished that bad old man quite sufficiently. Will you open the gate for me, and we'll go on our way?" The girl spoke with so much decision that Copplestone moved away from Chatfield, who struggled to his feet, muttering words that sounded very much like smothered curses. "I'll have the law on you!" he growled, shaking his fist at Copplestone. "Before this day's out I'll have the law!" "Sooner the better," retorted Copplestone. "Nothing will please me so much as to tell the local magistrates precisely what you said to your master's kinswoman. You know where I'm to be found. And there," he added, throwing a card at the agent's feet, "there you'll find my permanent address." "Give me my walking stick!" demanded Chatfield. "Not I!" exclaimed Copplestone. "That's mine, my good man, by right of conquest. You can summon me, or arrest me, if you like, for stealing it." He opened the wicket gate for Audrey, and together they passed through, skirted the walls of the ruins, and went away into the higher portion of the woods. Once there, the girl laughed. "Now there'll be another row," she said, "between master and man this time." "I think not," observed Copplestone, with unusual emphasis. "For the master is afraid of the man." "Ah, but which is master and which is man?" asked Audrey in a low voice. Copplestone stopped and looked narrowly at her. "Oh?" he said quietly. "So you've seen that?" "Does it need much observation?" she replied. "My mother and I have known for some time that Marston Greyle is entirely under Peter Chatfield's thumb. He daren't do anything save by Chatfield's permission." Copplestone walked on a few yards, ruminating. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "How do we know?" retorted Audrey. "Well, in cases like that," said Copplestone, "it generally means that one man has a hold on the other. What hold can Chatfield have on your cousin? I understand Mr. Marston Greyle came straight to his inheritance from America. So what could Chatfield know of him, to have any hold?" "Oh, I don't know and I don't care much," replied Audrey, as they passed out of the woods on to the headlands beyond. "Never mind all that here's the sea and the open sky. Hang Chatfield and Marston too! As we can't see the Keep, let's enjoy ourselves some other way. What shall we do?" "You're the guide, conductress, general boss," answered Copplestone. "Shall I suggest something that sounds very material, though? Well, then, can't we go along these cliffs to some village where we can find a nice old fishing inn and get a simple lunch of some sort?" "That's certainly material and eminently practical," laughed Audrey. "We can that place, along there to the south Lenwick. And so, come on and no more talk of Squire and agent. I've a remarkable facility in throwing away unpleasant things." "It's a grand faculty, and I'll try to imitate you," said Copplestone. "So today's our own, eh? Is that it?" "Say until the middle of this afternoon," responded Audrey. "Don't forget that I have a mother at home." It was, however, well past the middle of the afternoon when these two returned to Scarhaven, very well satisfied with themselves. They had found plenty to talk about without falling back on Marston Greyle or Peter Chatfield or the event of the morning, and Copplestone suddenly remembered, almost with compunction, that he had been so engrossed in his companion that he had almost forgotten the Oliver mystery. But that was sharply recalled to him as he entered the Admiral's arms. Mrs. Wooler came forward from her parlour with a mysterious smile on her good looking face. "Here's a billet doux for you, Mr. Copplestone," she said. "And I can't tell you who left it. One of the girls found it lying on the hall table an hour ago." With that she handed Copplestone a much thumbed, very grimy, heavily sealed envelope. Chapter 9 Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 9 Hopkins' Hole. Copplestone carried the queer looking missive into his private sitting room and carefully examined it, back and front, before slitting it open. The envelope was of the cheapest kind; the big splotch of red wax at the flap had been pressed into flatness by the summary method of forcing a coarse grained thumb upon it. The address was inscribed in ill formed characters only too evidently made with difficulty by a bad pen, which seemed to have been dipped into watery ink at every third or fourth letter, and it read thus: The young gentleman staying at the "Admiral" Private. The envelope contained nothing but a scrap of paper obviously torn from a penny cash book. No ink had been used in transcribing the 2 or 3 lines which were scrawled across this scrap. The vehicle this time was an indelible pencil, which the writer appeared to have moistened with his tongue every now and then, some letters being thicker and darker than others. The message, if mysterious, was straightforward enough. "Sir," it ran, "if so be as you like to have a bit of news from one as has it, take a walk through Hobkin's Hole to morrow morning and look out for yours truly him as writes this." Like most very young men, Copplestone on arriving at what he called manhood by which he meant the age of 21 years had drawn up for himself a code of ethics, wherein he had mentally scheduled certain things to be done and certain things not to be done. One of the things which he had firmly resolved never to do was to take any notice of an anonymous letter. Here was an anonymous letter, and with it a conflict between his principles and his inclinations. In 5 minutes he learned that cut and dried codes are no good when the hard facts of everyday life have to be faced, and that expediency is a factor in human existence which has its moral values. In plain English, he made up his mind to visit Hopkins Hole next morning and find out who the unknown correspondent was. He was half tempted to go round to the cottage and show the queer scrawl to Audrey Greyle, of whom, having passed 6 delightful hours in her company, he was beginning to think much more than was good for him, unless he intended to begin thinking of her always. But he was still young enough to have a spice of bashfulness about him, and he did not want to seem too pushing or forward. Again, it seemed to him that the anonymous letter conveyed, in some subtle fashion, a hint that it was to be regarded as sacred and secret, and Copplestone had a strong sense of honour. He knew that Mrs. Wooler was femininely curious to hear all about that letter, but he took care not to mention it to her. Instead, he quietly consulted an ordnance map of the district which hung framed and glazed in the hall of the inn, and discovering that Hobkin's Hole was marked on it as being something or other a mile or two out of Scarhaven on the inland side, he set out in its direction next morning after breakfast, without a word to anyone as to where he was going. And that he might not be entirely defenceless, he carried Peter Chatfield's oaken staff with him that would certainly serve to crack any ordinary skull if need arose for measure of defence. The road which Copplestone followed out of the village soon turned off into the heart of the moorlands that lay, rising and falling in irregular undulations, between the sea and the hills. He was quickly out of sight of Scarhaven and in the midst of a solitude. All round him stretched wide expanses of heather and gorse, broken up by great masses of rock. From a rise in the road he looked about him and saw no sign of a human habitation and heard nothing but the rush of the wind across the moors and the plaintive cry of the sea birds flapping their way to the cultivated land beyond the barrier of hills. And from that point he saw no sign of any fall or depression in the landscape to suggest the place which he sought. But at the next turn he found himself at the mouth of a narrow ravine, which cut deep into the heart of the hill, and was dark and sombre enough to seem a likely place for secret meetings, if for nothing more serious and sinister. It wound away from a little bridge which carried the road over a brawling stream. Along the side of that stream were faint indications of a path which might have been made by human feet, but was more likely to have been trodden out by the mountain sheep. This path was quickly obscured by dwarf oaks and alder bushes, which completely roofed in the narrow valley, and about everything hung a suggestion of solitude that would have caused any timid or suspicious soul to have turned back. But Copplestone was neither timid nor suspicious, and he was already intensely curious about this adventure. Wherefore, grasping Peter Chatfield's oaken cudgel firmly in his right hand, he jumped over the bridge and followed the narrow path into the gloom of the trees. He soon found that the valley resolved itself into a narrow and rocky defile. The stream, level at first, soon came tumbling down amongst huge boulders; the path disappeared; out of the oaks and alder high cliffs of limestones began to lift themselves. The morning was unusually dark and grey, even for October, and as leaves, brown and sere though they were, still clustered thickly on the trees, Copplestone quickly found himself in a gloom that would have made a nervous person frightened. He also found that his forward progress became increasingly difficult. At the foot of a tall cliff which suddenly rose up before him, he was obliged to pause. On that side of the stream it seemed impossible to go further. But as he hesitated, peering here and there under the branches of the dwarf oaks, he heard a voice so suddenly that he started in spite of himself. "Guv'nor!" Copplestone looked around and saw nothing. Then came a low laugh, as if the unseen person was enjoying his perplexity. "Look overhead, guv'nor," said the voice. "Look aloft." Copplestone glanced upward, and saw a man's head and face, framed in a screen of bushes which grew on a shelf of the limestone cliff. The head was crowned by a much worn fur cap; the face, very brown and seamed and wrinkled, was ornamented by a short, well blackened clay pipe, from the bowl of which a wisp of blue smoke curled upward; and as he grew accustomed to the gloom he was aware of a pair of shrewd, twinkling eyes and a set of very white teeth which gleamed like an animal's. "Hullo!" said Copplestone. "Come out of that." The white teeth showed themselves still more; their owner laughed again. "You come up, guv'nor," he said. "There's a natural staircase round the corner. Come up and make yourself at home. I've a nice little parlour here, and a matter of refreshment in it, too." "Not till you show yourself," answered Copplestone. "I want to see what I'm dealing with. Come out, now." The unseen laughed again, moved away from his screen, and presently showed himself on the ledge of the shelf of rock. And Copplestone found himself staring at a queer figure of a man an undersized, quaint looking fellow, clad in dirty velveteens, a once red waistcoat, and leather breeches and gaiters, a sort of compound between a poacher, a gamekeeper, and an ostler. But quainter than figure or garments was the man's face a gnarled, weather beaten, sea and wind stained face, which, in Copplestone's opinion, was honest enough and not without abundant traces of a sense of humour. Copplestone at once trusted that face. He swung himself up by the nooks and crannies of the rock, and joined the man on his ledge. "Well?" he said. "You're the chap who sent me that letter? Why?" "Come this way, guv'nor," replied the brown faced one. "We'll talk more comfortable like in my parlour. Here you are." He led Copplestone along the ridge behind the bushes, and presently revealed a cave in the face of the overhanging limestone, mostly natural, but partly due to artifice, wherein were rude seats, covered over with old sacking, a box or two which evidently served for pantry and larder, and a shelf on which stood a wicker covered bottle in company with a row of bottles of ale. The lord of this retreat waved a hospitable hand towards his cellar. "You'll not refuse a poor man's hospitality, guv'nor?" he said politely. "I can give you a clean glass, and if you'll try a drop of rum there's fresh water from the stream to mix it with good as you'll find in England. Or, maybe, it being the forepart of the day, you'd prefer ale now? Say the word." "A bottle of ale, then, thank you," responded Copplestone, who saw that he had to deal with an original, and did not wish to appear stand offish. "And whom am I going to drink with, may I ask?" The man carefully drew the cork of a bottle, poured out its contents with the discrimination of a bartender, handed the glass to his visitor with a bow, helped himself to a measure of rum, and bowed again as he drank. "My best respects to you, guv'nor," he said. "Glad to see you in Hopkins' Hole Castle that's here. Queer place for gentlemen to meet in, ain't it? Who are you talking to, says you? My name, guv'nor well known hereabouts is Zachary Spurge." "You sent me that note last night?" asked Copplestone, taking a seat and filling his pipe. "How did you get it there unseen?" "Got a cousin as is odd job man at the 'Admiral's Arms,'" replied Spurge. "He slipped it in for me. You may ha' seen him there, guv'nor chap with one eye, and queer looking, but to be trusted as I am, down to the ground." "And what do you want to see me about?" inquired Copplestone. "What's this bit of news you've got to tell?" Zachary Spurge thrust a hand inside his velveteen jacket and drew out a much folded and creased paper, which on being unwrapped proved to be the bill which offered a reward for the finding of Bassett Oliver. He held it up before his visitor. "This!" he said. £1,000 is a vast lot o' money, guv'nor. Now, if I was to tell you something as I knows of, what chances should I have of getting that there money?" "That depends," replied Copplestone. "The reward is to be given to but you see the plain wording of it. Can you give the information of that sort?" "I can give a certain piece of information, guv'nor," said Spurge. "Whether it'll lead to the finding of that there gentleman or not, I can't say. But something I do know certain sure." Copplestone reflected a while. "I'll tell you what, Spurge," he said. "I'll promise you this much. If you can give any information, I'll give you my word that, whether what you can tell me is worth much or little, you shall be well paid. That do?" "That'll do, guv'nor," responded Spurge. "I take your word as between gentlemen. Well, now, it's this here. You see me as I am, here in a cave, like one o' them old eremites that used to be in the ancient days. Why am I here? 'Cause just now it ain't quite convenient for me to show my face in Scarhaven. I'm wanted for poaching, guv'nor that's the fact. This here is a safe retreat. If I was tracked here, I could make my way out at the back o' this hole there's a passage here before anybody could climb that rock. However, nobody suspects I'm here. They think that is, that old devil Chatfield and the police they think I'm off to sea. However, here I am and last Sunday afternoon as ever was, I was in Scarhaven. In the wood I was, guv'nor, at the back of the Keep. Never mind what for I was there, and at precisely 10 minutes to 3 o'clock I saw Bassett Oliver." "How did you know him?" demanded Copplestone. "'Cause I've had many a sixpennyworth of him at both Northborough and Norcaster," answered Spurge. "Seen him a dozen times, I have, and knew him well enough, even if I'd only viewed him from the theayter gallery. Well, he come along up the path from the south quay. He passed within a dozen yards of me and went up to the door in the wall of the ruins, right opposite where I was lying doggo amongst some bushes. He poked the door with the point of his stick it was ajar, that door, and it went open and so he walks in and disappears. Guv'nor, I reckon that'd be the last time as he was seen alive. Unless " "Unless what?" asked Copplestone eagerly. "Unless one other man saw him," replied Spurge solemnly. "For there was another man there, guv'nor Squire Greyle." Copplestone looked hard at Spurge. Spurge returned the stare, and nodded 2 or 3 times. "Gospel truth!" he said. "I kept where I was I'd reasons of my own. Maybe 8 minutes or so certainly not 10 after Bassett Oliver walked in there, Squire Greyle walked out. In a hurry, guv'nor. He come out quick. He looked a bit queer dazed like. You know how quick a man can think, guv'nor, under certain circumstances. I thought quicker'n lightning. I says to myself, Squire's seen somebody or something he hadn't no taste for. Why, you could read it on his face, plain as print it was there." "Well?" said Copplestone. "And then?" "Then," continued Spurge, "then he stood for just a second or two, looking right and left, up and down. There wasn't a soul in sight nobody. But he slunk off sneaked off, same as a fox sneaks away from a farmyard. He went down the side of the curtain wall that shuts in the ruins, taking as much cover as ever he could find. At the end of the wall he popped into the wood that stands between the ruins and his house. And then, of course, I lost all sight of him." "And Mr. Oliver?" said Copplestone. "Did you see him again?" Spurge took a pull at his rum and water, and relighted his pipe. "I did not," he answered. "I was there until 3:15, then I went away, and no Oliver had come out of that door when I left." Chapter 10 of Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 10 The Invalid Curate. Spurge and his visitor sat staring at each other in silence for a few minutes. The silence was eventually broken by Copplestone. "Of course," he said reflectively, "if Mr. Oliver was looking round those ruins, he could easily spend half an hour there." "Just so," agreed Spurge. "He could spend an hour. If so be as he was one o' these here antiquarian minded gents as loves to potter about old places like that, he could spend 2 hours 3 hours profitable like. But he'd have come out in the end, and the evidence is, guv'nor, that he never did come out. Even if I am just now lying up, as it were, I'm fully what they term au fait with matters, and by all accounts, after Bassett Oliver went up that there path, subsequent to his bit o' talk with Ewbank, he was never seen no more, 'cepting by me, and possibly by Squire Greyle. Them as lives a good deal alone, like me, guv'nor, develops what you may call logical faculties they thinks, and thinks deep. I've thought. B.O. that's Oliver didn't go back by the way he'd come, or he'd ha' been seen. B.O. didn't go forward or through the woods to the headlands, or he'd ha' been seen. B.O. didn't go down to the shore, or he'd ha' been seen. 'Twixt you and me, guv'nor, B.O.'s dead body is in that there Keep." "Are you suggesting anything?" asked Copplestone. "Nothing, guv'nor no more than that," answered Spurge. "I'm making no suggestion and no accusation against nobody. I've seen a bit too much of life to do that. I've known more than one innocent man hanged there at Norcaster gaol in my time, all through what they call circumstantial evidence. Appearances is all very well, but appearances may be against a man to the very last degree, and yet him be as innocent as a new born baby. No, I make no suggestions 'ceptin' this here which has no doubt occurred to you or to B.O.'s brother. If I were the missing gentleman's friends, I should want to know a lot. I should want to know precisely what he meant when he said to Dan'l Ewbank as how he'd known a man called Marston Greyle in America. 'Tain't a common name, that, guv'nor." Copplestone made no answer to these observations. His own train of thought was somewhat similar to his host's, and presently he turned to a different track. "You saw no one else about there that afternoon?" he asked. "No one, guv'nor," replied Spurge. "And where did you go when you left that place?" inquired Copplestone. "To tell you the truth, guv'nor, I was waiting there for that cousin o' mine him as carried you the letter," answered Spurge. "It was a fixture between us. He was to meet me there about 3 o'clock that day. If he wasn't there, or in sight, by 3:15, I was to know he wasn't able to get away. So as he didn't come, I slipped back into the woods, and made my way back here, round by the moors." "Are you going to stay in this place?" asked Copplestone. "For a bit, guv'nor till I see how things are," replied Spurge. "As I say, I'm wanted for poaching, and Chatfield's been watching to get his knife into me this long while. All the same, if more serious things drew his attention off, he might let it slide. What do you ask for, guv'nor?" "I wanted to know where you could be found in case you were required to give evidence about seeing Mr. Oliver," replied Copplestone. "That evidence may be wanted." "I've thought of that," observed Spurge. "And you can always find that much out from my cousin at the Admiral. He keeps in touch with me. If it got too hot for me here, I should clear out to Norcaster there's a spot there where I've laid low many a time. You can trust my cousin Jim Spurge, that's his name. One eye no mistaking him he's always about the yard there at Mrs. Wooler's." "All right," said Copplestone. "If I want you, I'll tell him. By the by, have you told this to anybody?" "Not to a soul, guv'nor," replied Spurge. "Not even to Jim. No, I kept it dark till I could see you. Considering, of course, that you are left in charge of things, like." Copplestone presently went away and returned slowly to Scarhaven, meditating deeply on what he had heard. He saw no reason to doubt the truth of Zachary Spurge's tale it bore the marks of credibility. But what did it amount to? That Spurge saw Bassett Oliver enter the ruins of the Keep, by the one point of ingress; that a few moments later he saw Marston Greyle come away from the same place, evidently considerably upset, and sneak off in a manner which showed that he dreaded observation. That was all very suspicious, to say the least of it, taken in relation to Oliver's undoubted disappearance. But it was only suspicion it afforded no direct proof. However, it gave material for a report to Sir Cresswell Oliver, and he determined to write out an account of his dealings with Spurge that afternoon, and to send it off at once by registered letter. He was busily engaged in this task when Mrs. Wooler came into his sitting room to lay the table for his lunch. Copplestone saw at once that she was full of news. "Never rains but it pours," she said with a smile. "Though, to be sure, it isn't a very heavy shower. I've got another visitor now, Mr. Copplestone." "Oh?" responded Copplestone, not particularly interested. "Indeed!" "A young clergyman from London, the Reverend Gilling," continued the landlady. "Been ill for some time, and his doctor has recommended him to try the north coast air. So he came down here, and he's going to stop a while to see how it suits him." "I should have thought the air of the north coast was a bit strong for an invalid," remarked Copplestone. "I'm not delicate, but I find it quite strong enough for me." "I daresay it's a case of kill or cure," replied Mrs. Wooler. "Chest complaint, I should think. Not that the young gentleman looks particularly delicate, either. And he tells me that he's a very good appetite, and that his doctor says he's to live well, and to eat as much as ever he can." Copplestone got a view of his fellow visitor that afternoon in the hall of the inn, and agreed with the landlady that he showed no evident signs of delicacy of health. He was a good type of the conventional curate, with a rather pale, good humoured face set between his round collar and wide brimmed hat, and he glanced at Copplestone with friendly curiosity and something of a question in his eyes, and Copplestone, out of good neighbourliness, stopped and spoke to him. "Mrs. Wooler tells me you're come here to pick up," he remarked. "Pretty strong air round this quarter of the globe." "Oh, that's all right," said the new arrival. "The air of Scarhaven will do me good. It's full of just what I want." He gave Copplestone another look, and then glanced at the letters which he held in his hand. "Are you going to the post office?" he asked. "May I come? I want to go there too." The two young men walked out of the inn, and Copplestone led the way down the road towards the northern quay, and once they were well out of earshot of the "Admiral's Arms" and the two or three men who lounged near the wall in front of it, the curate turned to his companion with a sly look. "Of course you're Mr. Copplestone," he remarked. "You can't be anybody else. Besides, I heard the landlady call you so." "Yes?" replied Copplestone, distinctly puzzled by the other's manner. "What then?" The curate laughed quietly, and putting his fingers inside his heavy overcoat produced a card which he handed over. "My credentials," he said. Copplestone glanced at the card and read Sir Cresswell Oliver. He turned wonderingly to his companion, who laughed again. "Sir Cresswell told me to give you that as soon as I conveniently could," he said. "The fact is, I'm not a clergyman at all not I! I'm a private detective, sent down here by him and Petherton. See?" Copplestone stared for a moment at the wide brimmed hat, the round collar, the eminently clerical countenance. Then he burst into laughter. "I congratulate you on your make up, anyway!" he exclaimed. "Capital!" "Oh, I've been on the stage in my time," responded the private detective. "I'm a good hand at fitting myself to various parts. Besides, I've played the conventional curate a score of times. Yes, I don't think anybody would see through me, and I'm very particular to avoid the clergy." "And you left the stage for this?" asked Copplestone. "Why, now?" "Pays better heaps better," replied the other calmly. "Also, it's more exciting. There's much more variety in it. Well, now you know who I am. My name, by the by, is Gilling, though I'm not the Reverend Gilling, as Mrs. Wooler will call me. And so, as I've made things plain, how's this matter going so far?" Copplestone shook his head. "My orders," he said, with a significant look, "are to say nothing to anyone." "Except to me," responded Gilling. "Sir Cresswell Oliver's card is my passport. You can tell me anything." "Tell me something first," replied Copplestone. "Precisely what are you here for? If I'm to talk confidentially to you, you must talk in the same fashion to me." He stopped at a deserted stretch of the quay, and leaning against the wall which separated it from the sand, signed to Gilling to stop also. "If we're going to have a quiet talk," he went on, "we'd better have it now. No one's about, and if anyone sees us from a distance, they'll only think we're what we look to be casual acquaintances. Now, what is your job?" Gilling looked about him and then perched himself on the wall. "To watch Marston Greyle," he replied. "They suspect him?" asked Copplestone. "Undoubtedly." "Sir Cresswell Oliver said as much to me but no more. Have they said more to you?" "The suspicion seemed to have originated with Petherton. Petherton, in spite of his meek, old fashioned manners, is as sharp an old bird as you'll find in London. He fastened at once on what Bassett Oliver said to that fisherman, Ewbank. A keen nose for a scent, Petherton's and he's determined to find out who it was that Bassett Oliver met in the United States under the name of Marston Greyle. He's already set the machinery in motion. And in the meantime, I'm to keep my eye on this Squire as I shall." "Why watch him particularly?" "To see that he doesn't depart for unknown regions or if he does, to follow in his track. He's not to be lost sight of until this mystery is cleared. Because something is wrong." Copplestone considered matters in silence for a few moments, and decided not to reveal the story of Zachary Spurge to Gilling yet awhile, at any rate. However, he had news which there was no harm in communicating. "Marston Greyle," he said, presently, "or his agent, Peter Chatfield, or both, in common agreement, are already doing something to solve the mystery, so far as Greyle's property is concerned. They've closed the Keep and its surrounding ruins to the people who used to be permitted to go in, and they're conducting an exhaustive search for Bassett Oliver, of course." Gilling made a grimace. "Of course!" he said cynically. "Just so! I expected something of that sort. That's all part of a clever scheme." "I don't understand you," remarked Copplestone. "How a clever scheme?" "Whitewash!" answered Gilling. "Sheer whitewash! You don't suppose that either Greyle or Chatfield are fools? I should say they're far from it, from what little I've heard of 'em. Well, don't they know very well that Marston Greyle is under suspicion? All right they want to clear him. So they close their ruins and make a search a private search, mind you and at the end they announce that nothing's been found. And there you are! And supposing they did find something supposing they found Bassett Oliver's body what is it?" he asked suddenly, seeing Copplestone staring hard across the sands at the opposite quay. "Something happened?" "By gad! I believe something has happened!" exclaimed Copplestone. "Look there men running down the hillside from the Keep. And listen they're shouting to those fellows on the other quay. Come on across. Will it be out of keeping with your invalid pose if you run?" Gilling answered that question by lightly vaulting the wall and dropping to the sands beneath. "I'm not an invalid in my legs, anyhow," he answered, as they began to splash across the pools left by the recently retreated tide. "By George, I believe something has happened, too! Look at those people running out of their cottages." All along the south quay the fisher folk men, women, and children were crowding eagerly towards the gate of the path by which Bassett Oliver had gone up towards the Keep. When Copplestone and his companion gained the quay and climbed up its wall, they were pouring in at this gate and swarming up to the woods, all talking at the top of their voices. Copplestone suddenly recognized Ewbank on the fringe of the crowd and called to him. "What is it?" he demanded. "What's happened?" Ewbank, a man of leisurely movement, paused and waited for the two young men to come up. At their approach he took his pipe out of his mouth and inclined his head towards the Keep. "They're saying something's been found up there," he replied. "I don't know what. But Chatfield, he's sent two men down here to the village. One of 'em's gone for the police and the doctor, and t'other's gone to the 'Admiral' looking for you. You're wanted up there, partic'lar." CHAPTER XI of Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter XI Beneath the Brambles. By the time Copplestone and the pseudo curate had reached the plateau of open ground surrounding the ruins, it seemed as if half the population of Scarhaven had gathered there. Men, women, and children were swarming about the door in the curtain wall, all manifesting an eager desire to pass through. But the door was strictly guarded. Chatfield, armed with a new oak cudgel, stood there, masterful and lowering. Behind him were several estate labourers, all keeping the people back. And within the door stood Marston Greyle, evidently considerably restless and perturbed, and every now and then looking out on the mob which the fast spreading rumour had called together. In one of these inspections he caught sight of Copplestone, and spoke to Chatfield, who immediately sent one of his bodyguard through the throng. "Mr. Greyle says will you go forward, sir?" said the man. "Your friend can go in too, if he likes." "That's your clerical garb," whispered Copplestone, as he and Gilling made their way to the door. "But why this sudden politeness?" "Oh, that's easy to reckon up," answered Gilling. "I see through it. They want creditable and respectable witnesses to something or other. This big, heavy jowled man is Chatfield, of course?" "That's Chatfield," responded Copplestone. "What's he after?" For the agent, as the two young men approached, ostentatiously turned away from them, moving a few steps from the door. He muttered a word or two to the men who guarded it, and they stood aside and allowed Copplestone and the curate to enter. Marston Greyle came forward, eyeing Gilling with a sharp glance of inspection. He turned from him to Copplestone. "Will you come in?" he asked, not impolitely, and with a certain anxiety of manner. "I want you to be present, in fact. This gentleman is a friend of yours?" "An acquaintance of an hour," interposed Gilling, with ready wit. "I have just come to stay at the inn for my health's sake." "Perhaps you'll be kind enough to accompany us," said Greyle. "The fact is, Mr. Copplestone, we've found Mr. Bassett Oliver's body." "I thought so," remarked Copplestone. "And as soon as the police come up," continued Greyle, "I want you all to see exactly where it is. No one's touched it no one's been near it. Of course, he's dead." He lifted his hand with a nervous gesture, and the two others, who were watching him closely, saw that he was trembling a good deal, and that his face was very pale. "Dead of course," he went on. "He must have been killed instantaneously. And you'll see in a minute or two why the body wasn't found before, when we made that first search. It's quite explainable. The fact is " A sudden bustle at the door in the wall heralded the entrance of two policemen. The Squire went forward to meet them. The prospect of immediate action seemed to pull him together, and his manner changed to one of assertive superintendence of things. "Now, Mr. Chatfield," he called out, "keep all these people away. Close the door, and let no one enter, on any excuse. Stay there yourself, and see that we are not interrupted. Come this way, now," he went on, addressing the policemen and the two favoured spectators. "You've found him, then, sir?" asked the police sergeant in a thick whisper, as Greyle led his party across the grass to the foot of the Keep. "I suppose it's all up with the poor gentleman, of course? The doctor, he wasn't in, but they'll send him up as soon " "Mr. Bassett Oliver is dead," interrupted Greyle, almost harshly. "No doctors can do any good. Now look here," he continued, pulling them to a sudden halt. "I want all of you to take particular notice of this old tower the Keep. I believe you have not been in here before, Mr. Copplestone. Just pay particular attention to this place. Here you see is the Keep, standing in the middle of what I suppose was the courtyard of the old castle. It's a square tower, with a stair turret at one angle. The stair in that turret is in a very good state of preservation. In fact, it is quite easy to climb to the top, and from the top there's a fine view of land and sea. The Keep itself is nearly 100 feet in height. Now the inside of the Keep is completely gutted, as you'll presently see. There isn't a floor left of the 5 or 6 which were once there. And I'm sorry to say there's very little protection when one's at the top merely a narrow ledge with a very low parapet, which in places is badly broken. Consequently, anyone who climbs to the top must be very careful, or there's the danger of slipping off that ledge and falling to the bottom. Now, in my opinion, that's precisely what happened on Sunday afternoon. Oliver evidently got in here, climbed the stairs in the turret to enjoy the view, and fell from the parapet. And why his body hasn't been found before, I'll now show you." He led the way to the extreme foot of the Keep, and to a very low arched door, at which stood a couple of the estate labourers, one of whom carried a lighted lantern. To this man the Squire made a sign. "Show the way," he said in a low voice. The man turned and descended several steps of worn and moss covered stone which led through the archway into a dark, cellar like place. smelling strongly of damp and age. Greyle drew the attention of his companions to a heap of earth and rubbish at the entrance. "We had to clear all that out before we could get in here," he said. "This archway hadn't been opened for ages. This, of course, is the very lowest story of the Keep, and half beneath the level of the ground outside. Its roof has gone, like all the rest, but, as you see, something else has supplied its place. Hold up your lantern, Maris." The other men looked up and saw what the Squire meant. Across the tower, at a height of some 15 or 20 feet from the floor, Nature, left unchecked, had thrown a ceiling of green stuff. Bramble, ivy, and other spreading and climbing plants had in the course of years made a complete network from wall to wall. In places it was so thick that no light could be seen through it from beneath. In other places it was thin and glimpses of the sky could be seen from above the grey, tunnel like walls. And in one of those places, close to the walls, there was a distinct gap, jagged and irregular, as if some heavy mass had recently plunged through the screen of leaf and branch from the heights above, and beneath this the startled searchers saw the body, lying beside a heap of stones and earth in the unmistakable stillness of death. "You see how it must have happened," whispered Greyle, as they all bent round the dead man. "He must have fallen from the very top of the Keep from the parapet, in fact and plunged through this mass of green stuff above us. If he had hit that where it's so thick there it might have broken his fall, but you see he struck it at the very thinnest part, and being a big and heavyish man, of course, he'd crash right through it. Now, of course, when we examined the Keep on Monday morning it never struck us that there might be something down here. If you go up the turret stairs to the top and look down on this mass of green stuff from the very top, you'll see that it looks undisturbed there's scarcely anything to show that he fell through it, from up there. But he did." "Whose notion was it that he might be found here?" asked Cobblestone. "Chatfield's," replied the Squire. "Chatfield's. He and I were up at the top there, and he suddenly suggested that Oliver might have fallen from the parapet and be lying embedded in that mass of green stuff beneath. We didn't know then even Chatfield didn't know that there was this empty space beneath the green stuff. But when we came to go into it, we found there was, so we had that archway cleared of all the stone and rubbish, and of course we found him." "The body'll have to be removed, sir," whispered the police sergeant. "It'll have to be taken down to the inn, to wait the inquest." Marston Greyle started. "Inquest?" he said. "Oh! Will that have to be held?" "I suppose so yes. But we'd better wait until the doctor comes, hadn't we? I want him " The doctor came into the gloomy vault at that moment, escorted by Chatfield, who, however, immediately retired. He was an elderly, old fashioned, somewhat fussy mannered person, who evidently attached much more importance to the living Squire than to the dead man, and he listened to all Marston Greyle's explanations and theories with great deference and accepted each without demur. "Ah, yes, to be sure!" he said, after a perfunctory examination of the body. "The affair is easily understood. It is precisely as you suggest, Squire. The unfortunate man evidently climbed to the top of the tower, missed his footing, and fell headlong. That slight mass of branch and leaf would make little difference. He was, you see, a heavy man some 14 or 15 stone, I should think. Oh, instantaneous death, without a doubt. Well, well, these constables must see to the removal of the body, and we must let my friend the coroner know. He will hold the inquest to morrow, no doubt. Quite a mere formality, my dear sir. The whole thing is as plain as a pikestaff. It will be a relief to know that the mystery is now satisfactorily solved." Outside in the welcome freshness, Copplestone turned to the doctor. "You say the inquest will be held to morrow?" he asked. The doctor looked his questioner up and down, with an inquiry which signified doubt as to Copplestone's right to demand information. "In the usual course," he replied stiffly. "Then his brother, Sir Cresswell Oliver, and his solicitor, Mr. Petherton, must be wired for from London," observed Copplestone, turning to Greyle. "I'll communicate with them at once. I suppose we may go up the tower?" he continued as Greyle nodded his assent. I'd like to see the stairs and the parapet." Greyle looked a little doubtful and uneasy. "Well, I had meant that no one should go up until all this was gone into," he answered. "I don't want any more accidents. You'll be careful?" "We're both young and agile," responded Copplestone. "There's no need for alarm. Do you care to go up, Mr. Gilling?" The pseudo curate accepted the invitation readily, and he and Copplestone entered the turret. They had climbed half its height before Copplestone spoke. "Well?" he whispered. "What do you think?" "It may be an accident," muttered Gilling. "It mayn't." "You think he might have been what? Thrown down?" "Might have been caught unawares and pushed over. Let's see what there is up above, anyway." The stair in the turret, much worn, but comparatively safe, and lighted by loopholes and arrow slits, terminated in a low arched doorway, through which egress was afforded to a parapet which ran completely round the inner wall of the Keep. It was in no place more than a yard wide; the balustrading which fenced it in was in some places completely gone; a mere glance was sufficient to show that only a very cool headed and extremely sure footed person ought to traverse it. Copplestone contented himself with an inspection from the archway. He looked down and saw at once that a fall from that height must mean sure and swift death. He saw, too, that Greyle had been quite right in saying that the sudden plunge of Oliver's body through the leafy screen far beneath had made little difference to the appearance of that screen as seen from above. And now that he saw everything, it seemed to him that the real truth might well lie in one word accident. "Coming round this parapet?" asked Gilling, who was looking narrowly about him. "No," replied Copplestone. "I can't stand looking down from great heights it makes my head swim. Are you?" "Sure!" answered Gilling. He took off his heavy overcoat and handed it to his companion. "Mind holding it?" he asked. "I want to have a good look at the exact spot from which Oliver must have fallen. There's the gap such as it is, and it doesn't look much from here, does it? In the green stuff down below, so he must have been here on the parapet exactly above it. Gad! It's very narrow, and a bit risky, this, when all's said and done." Copplestone watched his companion make his way round to the place from which it was only too evident Oliver must have fallen. Gilling went slowly, carefully inspecting every yard of the moss and lichen covered stones. Once he paused some time and seemed to be examining a part of the parapet with unusual attention. When he reached the precise spot at which he had aimed, he instantly called across to Copplestone. "There's no doubt about his having fallen from here," he said. "Some of the masonry on the very edge of this parapet is loose I could dislodge it with a touch." "Then be careful!" answered Copplestone. "Don't cross that bit." But Gilling quietly continued his progress and returned to his companion by the opposite side from which he had set out. Having thus accomplished the entire round, he quietly reassumed his overcoat. "No doubt about the fall," he said, as they turned down the stair. "The next thing is was it accidental?" "And as regards that, what's to be done next?" asked Copplestone. "That's easy we must go at once and wire for Sir Cresswell and old Petherton," replied Gilling. "It's now 4:30. If they catch an evening express at King's Cross, they'll get here early in the morning. If they like to motor from Norcaster they can get here in the small hours. But they must be here for that inquest." Greyle was talking to Chatfield at the foot of the Keep when they got down. The agent turned surlily away, but the Squire looked at both with an unmistakable eagerness. "There's no doubt whatever that Oliver fell from the parapet," said Copplestone. "The marks of a fall are there quite unmistakably." Greyle nodded, but made no remark, and the two made their way through the still eager crowd and went down to the village post office. Both were wondering as they went about the same thing the evident anxiety and mental uneasiness of Marston Greyle. Chapter 12 of Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 12 Good Men and True. Copplestone saw little of his bed that night. At 7 o'clock in the evening came a telegram from Sir Cresswell Oliver, saying that he and Petherton were leaving at once, would reach Norcaster soon after midnight, and would motor out to Scarhaven immediately on arrival. Copplestone made all arrangements for their reception, and after snatching a couple of hours' sleep was up to receive them. By 2 o'clock in the morning Sir Cresswell and the old solicitor and Gilling, smuggled into their sitting room, had heard all he had to tell about Zachary Spurge and his story. "We must have that fellow at the inquest," said Petherton. "At any cost we must have him that's flat." "You think it wise?" asked Sir Cresswell. "Won't it be a bit previous? Wouldn't it be better to wait until we know more?" "No we must have his evidence," declared Petherton. "It will serve as an opening. Besides, this inquest will have to be adjourned I shall ask for that. No Spurge must be produced." "If Spurge comes into Scarhaven," observed Copplestone, "he'll be promptly collared by the police. They want him for poaching." "Then they can get him when the proceedings are over," retorted the old lawyer dryly. "They daren't touch him while he's giving evidence, and that's all we want. Perhaps he won't come? Oh, he'll come all right if we make it worth his while. A month in Norcaster gaol will mean nothing to him if he knows there's a chance of that reward or something substantial out of it at the end of his sentence. You must go out to this retreat of his and bring him in. We must have him. Better go very early in the morning." "I'll go now," said Copplestone. "It's as easy to go by night as by day." He left the other three to seek their beds, and himself slipped quietly out of the hotel by one of the ground floor windows and set off in a pitch black night to seek Spurge in his lair. And after sundry barkings of his shins against the rocks and scratchings of his hands and cheeks by the undergrowth of Hopkins' hole, he rounded the poacher out and delivered his message. Spurge, blinking at his visitor in the pale light of a guttering candle, shook his head. "I'll come, guv'nor," he said. "Of course I'll come. And I'll trust to luck to get away. And it don't matter a deal if the luck's again me I've done a month in Norcaster before today, and it ain't half a bad rest cure, if you only take it that way. But, guv'nor, that old lawyer's making a mistake. You didn't ought to have my bit of evidence at this stage. It's too soon. You want to work up the case a bit. There's such a thing, guv'nor, in this world as being a bit previous. This here's too previous. You want to be surer of your facts. Because you know, guv'nor, nobody'll believe my word agen Squire Greyle's. Guv'nor, this here inquest'll be naught but a blooming farce mark me! You ain't a native o' this part I am. Do you think as how a Scarhaven jury's going to say aught agen its own squire and landlord? Not it! I say, guv'nor, all a blooming farce mark my words." "All the same, you'll come?" asked Copplestone, who was secretly of Spurge's opinion. "You won't lose by it in the long run?" "Oh, I'll be there," responded Spurge. "Out of curiosity, if for nothing else. You mayn't see me at first, but let the lawyer from London call my name out, and Zachary Spurge'll step forward." There was abundant cover for Zachary Spurge and for half a dozen like him in the village school house when the inquest was opened at 10 o'clock that morning. It seemed to Copplestone that it would have been a physical impossibility to crowd more people within the walls than had assembled when the coroner, a local solicitor, who was obviously testy, irritable, self important and afflicted with deafness, took his seat and looked sourly on the crowd of faces. Copplestone had already seen him in conversation with the village doctor, the village police, Chatfield and Marston Greyle's solicitor, and he began to see the force of Spurge's shrewd remarks. What, of course, was most desired was secrecy and privacy. The Scarhaven powers had no wish that the attention of all the world should be drawn to this quiet place. But outsiders were there in plenty. Stafford and several members of Bassett Oliver's company had motored over from Norcaster and had succeeded in getting good places. There were half a dozen reporters from Norcaster and Northborough, and plain clothes police from both towns. And there, too, were all the principal folk of the neighbourhood, and Mrs. Greyle and her daughter, and, a little distance from Audrey, alert and keenly interested, was Addie Chatfield. It needed very little insight or observation on the part of an intelligent spectator to see how things were going. The 12 good men and true, required under the provisions of the old statute to form a jury, were all of them either Scarhaven tradesmen or Scarhaven householders or labourers on the estate. Their countenances, as they took their seats under the foremanship of a man whom Copplestone already knew as Chatfield's under steward, showed plainly that they regarded the whole thing as a necessary formality and that they were already prepared with a verdict. This impression was strengthened by the coroner's opening remarks. In his opinion, the whole affair, to which he did not even refer as unfortunate, was easily and quickly explained and understood. The deceased had come to the village to look round on a Sunday, be it observed had somehow obtained access to the Keep, where, the ruins being strictly private and not open to the public on any consideration on Sunday, he had no right to be, had indulged his curiosity by climbing to the top of the ancient tower, and had paid for it by falling down from that terrible height and breaking his neck. All that was necessary was for them to hear evidence bearing out these facts, after which they would return a verdict in accordance with what they had heard. Very fortunately, the facts were plain, and it would not be necessary to call many witnesses. Sir Cresswell Oliver turned to Copplestone, who sat at one side of him, while Petherton sat on the other. "I don't know if you noticed that Greyle isn't here?" he whispered grimly. "In my opinion, he doesn't intend to show. We'll see." Certainly the Squire was not in the place. And there were soon signs that those who conducted the proceedings evidently did not consider his presence necessary. The witnesses were few, their examination was perfunctory. They were out of the extemporized witness box as soon as they were in it. Sir Cresswell Oliver to give formal identification, Mrs. Wooler to prove that the deceased man came to her house, one of the foremen of the estate to prove the great care with which the Squire had searched for traces of the missing man, one of the estate labourers to prove the actual finding of the body, the doctor to prove beyond all doubt that the deceased had broken his neck. The coroner, an elderly man, obviously well satisfied with the trend of things, took off his spectacles and turned to the jury. "You have heard everything there is to be heard, gentlemen," said he. "As I remarked at the opening of this inquest, the case is one of great simplicity. You will have no difficulty in deciding that the deceased came to his death by accident. As to the exact wording of your verdict, you had better put it in this way that the deceased Bassett Oliver died as the result." Petherton, who, noticing the coroner's deafness, had contrived to seat himself as close to his chair of office as possible, quietly rose. "Before the jury consider any verdict," he said in his loudest tones, "they must hear certain evidence which I wish to call. And first of all, is Mr. Marston Greyle present in this room?" The coroner frowned, and the Squire's solicitor turned to Petherton. "Mr. Greyle is not present," he said. "He is not at all well. There is no need for his presence he has no evidence to give." "If you don't have Mr. Greyle down here at once," said Petherton quietly, "this inquest will have to be adjourned for his attendance. You had better send for him or I'll get the authorities to do so. In the meantime, we'll call one or two witnesses. Daniel Ewbank, to begin with." There was a brief and evidently anxious consultation between Greyle's solicitor and the coroner. There were dark looks at Petherton and his companions. Then the foreman of the jury spoke sullenly. "We don't want to hear no Ewbanks," he said. "We're quite satisfied, us as sits here. Our verdict is " "You'll have to bear Ewbank and anybody I like to call, my good sir," retorted Petherton quietly. "I am better acquainted with the law than you are." He turned to the coroner's officer. "I warned you this morning to produce Ewbank," he said. "Now where is he?" Out of a deep silence a shrill voice came from the rear of the crowd. "Knows better than to be here, does Daniel Ewbank, mister. He's off." "Very good or bad for somebody," remarked Petherton quietly. "Then until Mr. Marston Greyle comes, we will call Zachary Spurge." The assemblage, jurymen included, broke into derisive laughter as Spurge suddenly appeared from the most densely packed corner of the room, and it was at once evident to Copplestone that whatever the poacher might say no one there would attach any importance to it. The laughter continued and increased while Spurge was under examination. Petherton appealed to the coroner affected not to hear, and once more the foreman of the jury interrupted. "We don't want to hear no more o' this stuff," he said. "It's an insult to us to put a fellow like that before us. We don't believe a word o' what he says. We don't believe he was within a mile o' them ruins on Sunday afternoon. It's all a put up job." Petherton leaned towards the reporters. "I hope you gentlemen of the press will make a full note of these proceedings," he observed suavely. "You, at any rate, are not biassed or prejudiced." The coroner heard that in spite of his deafness, and he grew purple. "Sir!" he exclaimed. "That is a most improper observation. It's a reflection on my position, sir, and I've a great mind " "Mr. Coroner," observed Petherton, leaning towards him, "I shall hand in a full report concerning your conduct of these proceedings to the Home Office to morrow. If you attempt to interfere with my duty here, all the worse for you. Now, Spurge, you can stand down. And as I see Mr. Greyle there, call Marston Greyle." The Squire had appeared while Spurge was giving his evidence, and had heard what the poacher alleged. He entered the box very pale, angry and disturbed, and the glances which he cast on Sir Cresswell Oliver and his party were distinctly those of displeasure. "Swear him!" commanded Petherton. "Now, Mr. Greyle." But Greyle's own solicitor was on his legs, insisting on his right to put a first question. In spite of Petherton, he put it. "You heard the evidence of the last witness? Spurge. Is there a word of truth in it?" Marston Greyle, who certainly looked very unwell, moistened his lips. "Not one word!" he answered. "It's a lie!" The solicitor glanced triumphantly at the coroner and the jury, and the crowd raised unchecked murmurs of approval. Again the foreman endeavoured to stop the proceedings. "We regard all this here as very rude conduct to Mr. Greyle," he said angrily. "We're not concerned " "Mr. Foreman!" said Petherton. "You are a foolish man. You are interfering with justice. Be warned. I warn you if the coroner doesn't. Mr. Greyle, I must ask you certain questions. Did you see the deceased Bassett Oliver on Sunday last?" "No." "I needn't remind you that you are on your oath. Have you ever met the deceased man in your life?" "Never." "You never met him in America?" "I may have met him, but not to my recollection. If I did, it was in such a casual fashion that I have completely forgotten all about it." "Very well. You are on your oath, mind. Where did you live in America before you succeeded to this estate?" The Squire's solicitor intervened. "Don't answer that question!" he said sharply. "Don't answer any more. I object altogether to your line," he went on angrily, turning to Petherton. "I claim the coroner's protection for the witness." "I quite agree," said the coroner. "All this is absolutely irrelevant. You can stand down," he continued, turning to the Squire. "I will have no more of this, and I will take the full responsibility." "And the consequences, Mr. Coroner," replied Petherton calmly. "And the first consequence is that I now formally demand an adjournment of this inquest sine die." "On what grounds, sir?" demanded the coroner. "To permit me to bring evidence from America," replied Petherton, with a side glance at Marston Greyle. "Evidence already being prepared." The coroner hesitated, looked at Greyle's solicitor, and then turned sharply to the jury. "I refuse that application," he said. "You have heard all I have to say, gentlemen," he went on, "and you can return your verdict." Petherton quietly gathered up his papers and motioned to his friends to follow him out of the schoolroom. The foreman of the jury was returning a verdict of accidental death as they passed through the door, and they emerged into the street to an accompaniment of loud cheers for the Squire and groans for themselves. "What a travesty of justice!" exclaimed Sir Cresswell. "That fellow Spurge was right, you see, Copplestone. I wish we hadn't brought him into danger." Copplestone suddenly laughed and touched Sir Cresswell's arm. He pointed to the edge of the moorland just outside the school yard. Spurge was disappearing over that edge, and in a moment had vanished. Chapter XIII of Scarhaven Keep. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter XIII Mr. Dennie. Amongst the little group of actors and actresses who had come over from Norcaster to hear all that was to be told concerning their late manager, sat an old gentleman who, hands folded on the head of his walking cane, and chin settled on his hands, watched the proceedings with silent and concentrated attention. He was a striking figure of an old gentleman, tall, distinguished looking, handsome, with a face full of character, the strong lines and features of which were further accentuated by his silvery hair. He was a smart old gentleman, too, well and scrupulously attired and groomed, and his blue bird's eye necktie, worn at a rakish angle, gave him the air of something of a sporting man rather than of a follower of Thespis. His fellow members of the Oliver Company seemed to pay him great attention, and at various points of the proceedings whispered questions to him as to an acknowledged authority. This old gentleman, when the inquest came to its extraordinary end and the crowd went out murmuring and disputing, separated himself from his companions and made his way towards Mrs. Greyle and her daughter, who were quietly setting out homewards. To Audrey's surprise, the two elders shook hands in silence and inspected each other with a palpable wistfulness of look. "And yet it's 25 years since we met, isn't it?" said the old gentleman, almost as if he were talking to himself. "But I knew you at once. I was wondering if you remembered me." "Why, of course," responded Mrs. Greyle. "Besides, I've had an advantage over you. I've seen you, you know, several times at Norcaster. We go to the theatre now and then. Audrey, this is Mr. Dennie. You've seen him, too." On the stage, murmured the old actor, as he shook hands with the girl. I wonder if any of us are ever really off it. This affair, for instance there's a drama for you. By the by, this young Squire, he's your relation, of course?" "My nephew in law, and Audrey's cousin," replied Mrs. Greyle. Mr. Dennie, who had walked along with them towards their cottage, stopped in a quiet stretch of the quay, and looked meditatively at Audrey. "Then this young lady," he said, "is next heir to the Greyle estates, eh? For I understand this present Squire isn't married. Therefore " "Oh, that's something that isn't worth thinking about," replied Mrs. Greyle hastily. "Don't put such notions into the girl's head, Mr. Dennie. Besides, the Greyle estates are not entailed, you know. The present owner can do what he pleases with them. Besides that, he's sure to marry." "All the same," observed Mr. Dennie, imperturbably, "if this young man had not been in existence, this child would have succeeded, eh?" "Why, of course," agreed Mrs. Greyle a little impatiently. "But what's the use of talking about that, my old friend? The young man is in possession, and there you are." "Do you like the young man?" asked Mr. Dennie. "I take an old fellow's privilege in asking direct questions, you know. And though we haven't seen each other for all these years, you can say anything to me." "No, we don't," replied Mrs. Greyle. "And we don't know why we don't. So there's a woman's answer for you. Kinsfolk though we are, we see little of each other." Mr. Dennie made no remark on this. He walked along at Audrey's side, apparently in deep thought, and suddenly he looked across at her mother. "What do you think about this extraordinary tale of Bassett Oliver's having met a Marston Greyle over there in America?" he asked abruptly. "What do people here think about it?" "We're not in a position to hear much of what other people think," answered Mrs. Greyle. "What I think is that if this Marston Greyle ever did meet such a very notable and noticeable man as Bassett Oliver, it's a very, very strange thing that he's forgotten all about it." Mr. Dennie laughed quietly. "Aye, aye," he said. "But don't you think we folk of the profession are a little bit apt to magnify our own importance? You say, 'Bless me, how could anybody ever forget an introduction to Bassett Oliver?' But we must remember that to some people even a famous actor is of no more importance than shall we say a respectable grocer? Marston Greyle may be one of those people. It's quite possible he may have been introduced, quite casually, to Oliver at some club, or gathering, something or other, over there, and have quite forgotten all about it. Quite possible, I think." "I agree with you as to the possibility, but certainly not as to the probability," said Mrs. Greyle dryly. "Bassett Oliver was the sort of man whom nobody would forget. But here we are at our cottage. You'll come in, Mr. Dennie?" "It will only have to be for a little time, my dear lady," said the old actor, pulling out his watch. "Our people are going back very soon, and I must join them at the station." "I'll give you a glass of good old wine," said Mrs. Greyle, as they went into the cottage. "I have some that belonged to my father in law, the old Squire. You must taste it for old times' sake." Mr. Dennie followed Audrey into the little parlour as Mrs. Greyle disappeared to another part of the house, and the instant they were alone he tapped the girl's arm and gave her a curiously warning look. "Hush, my dear!" he whispered. "Not a word. Don't want your mother to know. Listen have you a specimen letter anything of your cousin, the Squire's handwriting? Anything so long as it's his. You have? Give it to me. Say nothing to your mother. Wait until tomorrow morning. I'll run over to see you again, about noon. It's important. But silence!" Audrey, scarcely understanding the old man's meaning, opened a desk and drew out one or two letters. She selected one and handed it to Mr. Dennie, who made haste to put it away before Mrs. Greyle returned. He gave Audrey another warning look. "That was what I wanted," he said mysteriously. "I thought of it during the inquest. Never mind why, just now. You'll know tomorrow." He lingered a few minutes, chatting to his hostess about old times as he sipped the old Squire's famous port. Then he went off to the little station, joined Stafford and his fellow actors and actresses, and returned with them to Norcaster. And at Norcaster Mr. Dennie separated himself from the rest and repaired to his quiet lodgings, rooms which he had occupied for many years in succession whenever they went that way on tour. And once safely bestowed in them he pulled out a certain old fashioned trunk which he had owned since boyhood and lugged about wherever he went in 2 continents, and from it, after much methodical unpacking, he disinterred a brown paper parcel, neatly tied up with green ribbon. From this parcel he drew a thin packet of typed matter, and a couple of letters. The typescript he laid aside, the letters he opened out on his table. Then he took from his pocket the letter which Audrey Greyle had given him, and put it side by side with those taken from the parcel. And after one brief glance at all three, Mr. Dennie made typescript and letters up again into a neat packet, restored them to his trunk, locked them up, and turned to the 2 hours' rest which he always took before going to the theatre for his evening's work. He was back at Scarhaven by 11 o'clock the next morning, with his neat packet under his arm, and he held it up significantly to Audrey, who opened the door of the cottage to him. "Something to show you," he said, with a quiet smile as he walked in. "To show you and your mother." He stopped short on the threshold of the little parlour, where Copplestone was just then talking to Mrs. Greyle. "Oh!" he said, a little disappointedly. "I hoped to find you alone. I'll wait." Mrs. Greyle explained who Copplestone was, and Mr. Dennie immediately brightened. Of course!" he explained. "I know glad to meet you, Mr. Copplestone. You don't know me, but I know you or your work well enough. It was I who read and recommended your play to our poor dear friend. It's a little secret, you know," continued Mr. Dennie, laying his packet on the table, "but I have acted for a great many years as Bassett Oliver's literary adviser taster, you might say. You know he had a great number of plays sent to him, of course, and he was a very busy man, and he used to hand them over to me in the first place, to take a look at a taste of, you know, and if I liked the taste, why, then he took a mouthful himself, eh? And that brings me to the very point, my dear ladies, and my dear young gentlemen, that I have come specially to Scarhaven this morning to discuss. It's a very, very serious matter indeed," he went on, as he untied his packet of papers, "and I fear that it's only the beginning of something more serious. Come round me here at this table, all of you, if you please." The other three drew up chairs, each wondering what was coming, and the old actor resumed his eyeglasses and gave obvious signs of making a speech. "Now I want you all to attend to me, very closely," he said. "I shall have to go into a detailed explanation, and you will very soon see what I am after. As you may be aware, I have been a personal friend of Bassett Oliver for some years, and a member of his company without break for the last 8 years. I accompanied Bassett Oliver on his 2 trips to the United States, therefore I was with him when he was last there, years ago. Now, while we were at Chicago that time, Bassett came to me one day with the typescript of a 1-act play, and told me that it had been sent to him by a correspondent signing himself Marston Greyle, who, in a covering letter, said that he sprang from an old English family, and that the play dealt with a historic, romantic episode in its history. The principal part, he believed, was one which would suit Bassett, therefore he begged him to consider the matter. Bassett asked me to read the play, and I took it away, with the writer's letter, for that purpose. But we were just then very busy, and I had no opportunity of reading anything for a time. Later on we went to St. Louis, and there, of course, Bassett, as usual, was much fêted and went out a great deal, lunching with people and so on. One day he came to me. "By the by, Dennie," he said, "I met that Mr. Marston Greyle today, who sent me that romantic one act thing. He wanted to know if I'd read it, and I had to confess that it was in your hands. Have you looked at it?" I, too, had to confess I hadn't. "Well," said he, "read it and let me know what you think. Will it suit me?" I made time to read the little play during the following week, and I told Bassett that I didn't think it would suit him, but I felt sure it might suit Montagu Gaines, who plays just such parts. Bassett thereupon wrote to the author and said what I, his reader, thought, and kindly offered, as he knew Gaines intimately, to show the little work to him on his return to England. And this Mr. Marston Greyle wrote back, thanking Bassett warmly and accepting his kind offer. Accordingly, I brought the play with me to England. Montagu Gaines, however, had just set off on a 2 years' tour to Australia; consequently, the play and the author's 2 letters have remained in my possession ever since. And here they are. Mr. Dennie laid his hand dramatically on his packet, looked significantly at his audience, and went on. "Now, when I heard all that I did hear at that inquest yesterday," he said, "I naturally remembered that I had in my possession 2 letters which were undoubtedly written to Bassett Oliver by a young man named Marston Greyle, whom Oliver, just as undoubtedly, had personally met in St. Louis. And so when the inquest was over, Mr. Copplestone, I recalled myself to Mrs. Greyle here, whom I had known many years ago, and I walked back to this house with her and her charming daughter, and don't be angry, Mrs. Greyle while the mother's back was turned, on hospitable thoughts intent, I got the daughter to lend me, secretly, a letter written by the present Squire of Scarhaven. Armed with that, I went home to my lodgings in Norcaster, found the letter written by the American Marston Greyle, and compared it with them. And here is the result." The old actor selected the 2 American letters from his papers, laid them out on the table, and placed the letter which Audrey had given him beside them. "Now," he said, as his 3 companions bent eagerly over these exhibits, "look at those 3 letters. All bear the same signature, Marston Greyle. But the handwriting of those 2 is as different from that of this one as chalk is from cheese." Chapter 14. Scarhaven Keep. This recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 14. By private treaty. There was little need for the 3 deeply interested listeners to look long at the letters. One glance was sufficient to show even a careless eye that the hand which had written one of them had certainly not written the other 2. The letter which Audrey had handed to Mr. Dennie was penned in the style commonly known as commercial plain, commonplace, utterly lacking in the characteristics which are supposed to denote imagination and a sense of artistry. It was the sort of calligraphy which one comes across every day in shops and offices and banks. There was nothing in any upstroke, downstroke, or letter which lifted it from the very ordinary. But the other 2 letters were evidently written by a man of literary and artistic sense, possessing imagination and a liking for effect. It needed no expert in handwriting to declare that 2 totally different individuals had written those letters. "And now," observed Mr. Dennie, breaking the silence and putting into words what each of the others was vaguely feeling, "the question is, what does all this mean? To start with, Marston Greyle is a most uncommon name. Is it possible there can be 2 persons of that name? That, at any rate, is the first thing that strikes me." "It is not the first thing that strikes me," said Mrs. Greyle. She took up the typescript which the old actor had brought in his packet, and held its title page significantly before him. "That is the first thing that strikes me!" she exclaimed. "The Marston Greyle who sent this to Bassett Oliver said, according to your story, that he sprang from a very old family in England, and that this is a dramatization of a romantic episode in its annals. Now there is no other old family in England named Greyle, and this episode is, of course, the famous legend of how Prince Rupert once sought refuge in the Keep yonder and had a love passage with the lady of the house. Am I right, Mr. Dennie?" "Quite right, ma'am, quite correct," replied the old actor. "It is so. You have guessed correctly." "Very well, then. The Marston Greyle who wrote this and those letters, and who met Bassett Oliver, was without doubt the son of Marcus Greyle, who went to America many years ago. He was the same Marston Greyle who, his father being dead, of course succeeded his uncle, Stephen John Greyle. That seems an absolute certainty. And in that case," continued Mrs. Greyle, looking earnestly from one to the other, "in that case, who is the man now at Scarhaven Keep?" A dead silence fell on the little room. Audrey started and flushed at her mother's eager, pregnant question. Mr. Dennie sat up very erect and took a pinch of snuff from his old fashioned box. Copplestone pushed his chair away from the table and began to walk about, and Mrs. Greyle continued to look from one face to the other as if demanding a reply to her question. "Mother," said Audrey in a low voice, "you aren't suggesting " "Ahem!" interrupted Mr. Dennie. "A moment, my dear. There is nothing, I believe," he continued, waxing a little oracular, "nothing like plain speech. We are all friends we have a common cause justice. It may be that justice demands our best endeavours not only as regards our deceased friend, Bassett Oliver, but in the interests of this young lady. So " "I wish you wouldn't, Mr. Dennie!" exclaimed Audrey. "I don't like this at all please don't!" She turned, almost instinctively, to seek Copplestone's aid in repressing the old man. But Copplestone was standing by the window, staring moodily at the wind swept quay beyond the garden, and Mr. Dennie waved his snuff box and went on. "An old man's privilege," he said. "In your interests, my dear allow me." He turned again to Mrs. Greyle. "In plain words, ma'am, you are wondering if the present holder of the estates is really what he claims to be. Plain English, eh?" "I am," answered Mrs. Greyle with a distinct ring of challenge and defiance. "And now that it comes to the truth, I have wondered that ever since he came here. There!" "Why, mother?" asked Audrey, wonderingly. "Because he doesn't possess a single Greyle characteristic," replied Mrs. Greyle, readily enough. "I ought to know. I married Valentine Greyle, and I knew Stephen John, and I saw plenty of both, and something of their father, too, and a little of Marcus before he emigrated. This man does not possess one single scrap of the Greyle temperament." Mr. Dennie put away his snuff box, and drumming on the table with his fingers, looked out of his eye corners at Copplestone, who still stood with his back to the rest, staring out of the window. "And what," said Mr. Dennie, softly, "what does our good friend Mr. Copplestone say?" Copplestone turned swiftly and gave Audrey a quick glance. "I say," he answered in a sharp, businesslike fashion, "that Gilling, who's stopping at the inn, you know, is walking up and down outside here, evidently looking out for me, and very anxious to see me. And with your permission, Mrs. Greyle, I'd like to have him in. Now that things have got to this pitch, I'd better tell you something I don't see any good in concealing it longer. Gilling isn't an invalid curate at all he's a private detective. Sir Cresswell Oliver and Petherton, the solicitor, sent him down here to watch Greyle the Squire, you know. That's Gilling's job. They suspect Greyle have suspected him from the very first but of what I don't know. Not of this, I think. Anyway, they do suspect him, and Gilling's had his eye on him ever since he came here. And I'd like to fetch Gilling in here, and I'd like him to know all that Mr. Dennie's told us. Because, don't you see, Sir Cresswell and Petherton ought to know all that, immediately, and Gilling's their man." Audrey's brows had been gathering in lines of dismay and perplexity all the time Copplestone was talking, but her mother showed no signs of anything but complete composure, crowned by something very like satisfaction, and she nodded a ready acquiescence in Copplestone's proposal. "By all means," she responded. "Bring Mr. Gilling in at once." Copplestone hurried out into the garden and signalled to the pseudo curate, who came hurrying across from the quay. One glance at him showed Copplestone that something had happened. "Gad! I thought I should never attract your attention," said Gilling hastily. Been making eyes at you for 10 minutes. I say, Greyle's off." "Off!" exclaimed Copplestone. "How do you mean off?" "Left Scarhaven, anyhow, for London," replied Gilling. "An hour ago I happened to be at the station, buying a paper, when he drove up, luggage and man with him, so I knew he was off for some time, and I took good care to dodge round by the booking office when the man took the tickets. King's Cross. So that's all right for the time being." "How do you mean, all right?" asked Copplestone. "I thought you were to keep him in sight." "All right," repeated Gilling. "I have more eyes than these, my boy. I've a particularly smart partner in London, name of Swallow, and he and I have a cipher code. So as soon as the gentleman had left, I repaired to the nearest post office and wired a code message to Swallow. Swallow will meet that train when it strikes King's Cross, and it doesn't matter if Greyle hides himself in one of the spikes on top of the Monument or inside the Lion House at the Zoo, Swallow will be there. No man ever got away from Swallow once Swallow had set eyes on him." Copplestone looked, listened, and laughed. "Professional pride!" he said. "All right I want you to come in here with me to Mrs. Greyle's. Something's happened here, too, and of such a serious nature that I've taken the liberty of telling them who and what you really are. You'll forgive me when you hear what it is that we've learnt here this morning." Gilling had looked rather doubtful at Copplestone's announcement, but he immediately turned towards the cottage. "Oh, well," he said good naturedly, "I'm sure you wouldn't have told if you hadn't felt there was good reason. What is this fresh news? Something about him?" "Very much about him," answered Copplestone. "Come in." He himself, at Mrs. Greyle's request, gave Gilling a brief account of Mr. Dennie's revelations, the old actor supplementing it with a shrewd remark or two. And then all four turned to Gilling as to an expert in these matters. "Queer!" observed Gilling. "Decidedly queer! There may be some explanation, you know. I've known stranger things than that turn out to be perfectly straight and plain when they were gone into, but, putting all the facts together, I don't think there's much doubt that there's something considerably wrong in this case. I should like to repeat it to my principals I must go up to town in any event this afternoon. Better let me have all those documents, Mr. Dennie I'll give you a proper receipt for them. There's something very valuable in them, anyhow." "What?" asked Copplestone. "The address in St. Louis from which that Marston Greyle wrote to Bassett Oliver," replied Gilling. "We can communicate with that address at once. We may learn something there. But," he went on, turning to Mrs. Greyle, "I want to learn something here and now. I want to know where and under what circumstances the Squire came to Scarhaven. You were here then, of course, Mrs. Greyle? You can tell me?" "He came very quietly," replied Mrs. Greyle. "Nobody in Scarhaven, unless it was Peter Chatfield, knew of his coming. In fact, nobody in these parts, at any rate, knew he was in England. The family solicitors in London may have known, but nothing was ever said or written to me, though my daughter, failing this man, is the next in succession." "I do wish you'd leave all that out, mother!" exclaimed Audrey. "I don't like it." "Whether you like it or not, it's the fact," said Mrs. Greyle imperturbably, "and it can't be left out. Well, as I say, no one knew the Squire had come to England until one day Chatfield calmly walked down the quay with him, introducing him right and left. He brought him here." "Ah!" said Gilling. "That's interesting. Now I wonder if you found out if he was well up in the family history?" "Not then, but afterwards," answered Mrs. Greyle. "He is particularly well up in the Greyle records suspiciously well up." "Why suspiciously?" asked Copplestone. "He knows more in a sort of antiquarian and historian fashion than you'd suppose a young man of his age would," said Mrs. Greyle. "He gives you the impression of having read it up studied it deeply. And his usual tastes don't lie in that direction." "Ah!" observed Mr. Dennie musingly. "Bad sign, ma'am bad sign. Looks as if you'd been shall we say put up to overstudying his part? That's possible. I have known men who were so anxious to be what one calls letter perfect, Mr. Copplestone, that though they knew their parts they didn't know how to play them. Fact, sir." While the old actor was chuckling over this reminiscence, Gilling turned quietly to Mrs. Greyle. "I think you suspect this man," he said. "Frankly, yes," replied Mrs. Greyle. I always have done, though I have said so little." "Mother," interrupted Audrey, "is it really worth while saying so much now? After all, we know nothing, and if this is all mere supposition However," she broke off, rising and going away from the group, "perhaps I had better say nothing." Copplestone, too, rose and followed her into the window recess. "I say," he said entreatingly, "I hope you don't think me interfering. I assure you " "You!" she exclaimed. "Oh, no, of course! I think you're anxious to clear things up about Mr. Oliver, but I don't want my mother dragged into it, for a simple reason we've got to live here, and Chatfield is a vindictive man." "You're frightened of him!" said Copplestone incredulously. "You!" "Not for myself," she answered, giving him a warning look, and glancing apprehensively at Mrs. Greyle, who was talking eagerly to Mr. Dennie and Gilling. "But my mother is not as strong as she looks, and it would be a blow to her to leave this place, and we are the Squire's tenants, and therefore at Chatfield's mercy. And you know that Chatfield does as he likes. Now do you understand?" "It maddens me to think that you should be at Chatfield's mercy," muttered Copplestone. "But do you really mean to say that if Chatfield thought you that is, your mother were mixed up in anything relating to the clearing up of this affair, he would " "Drive us out without mercy?" replied Audrey. "That's dead certain." "And that your cousin would let him?" exclaimed Copplestone. "Surely not!" "I don't think the Squire has any control over Chatfield," she answered. "You have seen them together." "If that's so," said Copplestone, "I shall begin to think there is something queer about the Squire in the way your mother suggests. It looks as if Chatfield had a hold on him, and in that case " He suddenly broke off as a smart automobile drove up to the cottage door and set down a tall, distinguished looking man, who after a glance at the little house walked quickly up the garden. Audrey's face showed surprise. "Mother!" she said, turning to Mrs. Greyle. "That's Lord Altmore here! He must want you or shall I go?" Mrs. Greyle quitted the room hastily. The others heard her welcome the visitor, lead him up the tiny hall, they heard a door shut. Audrey looked at Copplestone. "You've heard of Lord Altmore, haven't you?" she said. "He's our biggest man in these parts. He owns all the country at the back mountains, valleys, everything. The Greyle land shuts him off from the sea. In the old days, Greyles and Altmores used to fight over their boundaries, and " Mrs. Greyle suddenly showed herself again and looked at her daughter. "Will you come here, Audrey?" she said. "You gentlemen will excuse both of us for a few minutes." Mother and daughter went away, and the two young men drew up their chairs to the table at which Mr. Dennie sat and exchanged views with him on the curious situation. Half an hour went by; then steps and voices were heard in the hall and the garden. Mrs. Greyle and Audrey were seeing their visitor out to his car. In a few minutes the car sped away, and they came back to the parlour. One glance at their faces showed Gilling that some new development had cropped up, and he nudged Copplestone. "Here is remarkable news," said Mrs. Greyle as she went back to her chair. "Lord Altmore called to tell me of something that he thought I ought to know. It is almost unbelievable, yet it is a fact. Marston Greyle if he is Marston Greyle has offered to sell Lord Altmore the entire Scarhaven estate by private treaty. Imagine it! The estate which has belonged to the Greyles for 500 years!" Chapter 15 of Scarhaven Keep. Recording is in the public domain. Scarhaven Keep, by Joseph Smith Fletcher. Chapter 15 The Cablegram from New York. The two younger men received this announcement with no more than looks of astonished inquiry, but the elder one coughed significantly, had further recourse to his snuff box, and turned to Mrs. Greyle with a knowing glance. "My dear lady," he said impressively, "now this is a matter in which I believe I can be of service real service. You may have forgotten the fact it is all so long ago, and perhaps I never mentioned it in the old days, but the truth is that before I went on the stage I was in the law. The fact is, I am a duly and fully qualified solicitor. Though," he added with a dry chuckle, "it is a good 25 years since I paid the £6 for the necessary annual certificate. But I have not forgotten my law, or some of it, and no doubt I can furbish up a little more, if necessary. You say that Mr. Marston Greyle, the present owner of Scarhaven, has offered to sell his estate to Lord Altmore? But is not the estate entailed?" "No," replied Mrs. Greyle, "it is not." Mr. Dennie's face fell unmistakably. He took another pinch of snuff and shook his head. "Then in that case," he said dryly, "all the lawyers in the world can't help. It's his, absolutely, and he can do what he pleases with it. 500 years, you say? Remarkable! That a man should want to sell land his forefathers have walked over for half a thousand years! Extraordinary!" "Did Lord Altmore say if any reason had been given him as to why Mr. Greyle wished to sell?" asked Gilling. "Yes," replied Mrs. Greyle, who was obviously greatly upset by the recent news. "He did. Mr. Greyle gave as his reason that the north does not suit him, and that he wishes to buy an estate in the south of England. He approached Lord Altmore first, because it is well known that the Altmores have always been anxious to extend their own borders to the coast." "Does Lord Altmore want to buy?" asked Gilling. "It is very evident that he would be quite willing to buy," said Mrs. Greyle. "What made him come to you?" continued Gilling. "He must have had some reason." "He had a reason," Mrs. Greyle answered, with a glance at Audrey. "He knows the family history, of course. He is very well aware that my daughter is at present the heir apparent. He therefore thought we ought to know of this offer. But that is not quite all. Lord Altmore has, of course, read the accounts of the inquest in this morning's paper. Also his steward was present at the inquest, and from what he has read, and from what his steward told him, Lord Altmore thinks there is something wrong. He thinks, for instance, that Marston Greyle should explain this mystery about the meeting with Bassett Oliver in America. At any rate, he will go no further in any negotiations until that mystery is properly cleared up. Shall I tell you what Lord Altmore said on that point? He said " "Is it worth while, mother?" interrupted Audrey. "It was only his opinion." "It is worth while amongst ourselves," insisted Mrs. Greyle. "Why not?" "Lord Altmore said in so many words, 'I have a sort of uneasy feeling, after reading the evidence at that inquest, and hearing what my steward's impressions were, that this man calling himself Marston Greyle may not be Marston Greyle at all, and I shall want good proof that he is before I even consider the proposal he has made to me.' There! So what's to be done?" "The law, ma'am," observed Mr. Dennie, solemnly. "The law must step in. You must get an injunction, ma'am, to prevent Mr. Marston Greyle from dealing with the property until his own title to it has been established. That, at any rate, is my opinion." "May I ask a question?" said Copplestone, who had been listening and thinking intently. "Did Lord Altmore say when this offer was made to him?" "Yes," replied Mrs. Greyle. "A week ago." "A week ago!" exclaimed Copplestone. "That is, before last Sunday before the Bassett Oliver episode? Then the offer to sell is quite independent of that affair." "Strange and significant!" muttered Gilling. He rose from his chair and looked at his watch. "Well," he said, "I am going off to London. Will you give me leave, Mrs. Greyle, to report all this to Sir Cresswell Oliver and Mr. Petherton? They ought to know." "I'm going too," declared Copplestone, also rising. "Mrs. Greyle, I'm sure, will entrust the whole matter to us. And Mr. Dennie will trust us with those papers." "Oh, certainly, certainly!" asserted Mr. Dennie, pushing his packet across the table. "Take care of 'em, my boy. You don't know how important they may turn out to be." "And Mrs. Greyle?" asked Copplestone. "Tell whatever you think it best to tell," replied Mrs. Greyle. "My own opinion is that a lot will have to be told and to come out yet." "We can catch a train in 3/4 of an hour, Copplestone," said Gilling. "Let's get back and settle up with Mrs. Wooler and be off." Copplestone contrived to draw Audrey aside. "This isn't good bye," he whispered, with a meaning look. "You'll see me back here before many days are over. But listen if anything happens here if you want anybody's help in any way you know what I mean promise you'll wire to me at this address? Promise, or I won't go." "Very well," said Audrey. "I promise. But why shall you come back?" "Tell you when I come," replied Copplestone with another look. "But I shall come, and soon. I'm only going because I want to be of use to you." An hour later he and Gilling were on their way to London, and from opposite corners of a compartment which they had contrived to get to themselves they exchanged looks. "This is a queer business, Copplestone," said Gilling. "It strikes me it's going to be a big one, too. And it's coming to a point round Squire Greyle." "Do you think your man will have tracked him?" asked Copplestone. "It will be the first time Swallow's ever lost sight of anybody if he hasn't," answered Gilling. "He's a human ferret. However, I wired to him just before we left, telling him to meet me at King's Cross, so we'll get his report. Oh, he'll have followed him all right. I don't believe for a moment that Greyle is trying to evade anybody at this juncture, at any rate." But when 4 hours later the train drew into King's Cross, and Gilling's partner, a young and sharp looking man, presented himself, it was with a long and downcast face, and a lugubrious shake of the head. "Done! For the first time in my life!" he growled in answer to Gilling's eager inquiry. "Lost him never failed before, as you know. Well, it had to come, I suppose. Can't go on without an occasional defeat. But I'm a bit licked as to the whole thing unless your man is dodging somebody. Is he?" "Tell your tale," commanded Gilling, motioning Copplestone to follow him and Swallow aside. "I was up here in good time this afternoon to meet his train," reported Swallow. "I spotted him and his man at once no difficulty, as your description of both was so full. They were together while the luggage was got out. Then he, Greyle, gave some instructions to the man and left him. He himself got into a taxi cab. I got into another close behind and gave its driver certain orders. Greyle drove straight to the Fragonard Club you know." "Ah!" exclaimed Gilling. "Did he, now? That's worth knowing." "What's the Fragonard Club?" asked Copplestone. "Never heard of it." "Club of folk connected with the stage and the music halls," answered Gilling, testily. "In a side street off Shaftesbury Avenue tell you more of it later. Go on, Swallow." "He paid off his driver there, and went in," continued Swallow. "I paid mine and hung about. There's only one entrance and exit to that spot, as you know. He came out again within 5 minutes, stuffing some letters into his pocket. He walked away across Shaftesbury Avenue into Wardour Street. There he went into a tobacconist's shop. Of course I hung about again. But this time he didn't come. So at last I walked in to buy something. He wasn't there." "Pooh! He'd slipped out walked out when you weren't looking?" said Gilling. "Why didn't you keep your eye on the ball, man? You!" "You be hanged!" retorted Swallow. "Never had an eyelash off that shop door from the time he entered until I, too, entered." "Then there's a side door to that shop into some alley or passage," said Gilling. "Not that I could find," answered Swallow. "Might be at the rear of the premises, perhaps, but I couldn't ascertain, of course. Remember, there's another thing he may have stopped on the premises. There's that in it. However, I know the shop and the name." "Why didn't you bring somebody else with you to follow the man and the luggage?" demanded Gilling, half petulantly. Swallow shook his head. "There I made a mess of it, I confess," he admitted. "But it never struck me they'd separate. I thought, of course, they'd drive straight to some hotel and " "And the long and the short of it is, Greyle slipped you," said Gilling. "Well, there's no more to be done tonight. The only thing of value is that Greyle called at the Fragonard. What's a country squire, only recently come to England, too, to do with the Fragonard? That is worth something. Well, Copplestone, we'd better meet in the morning at Petherton's. You be there at 10 o'clock, and I'll get Sir Cresswell Oliver to be there, too." Copplestone betook himself to his rooms in Jermyn Street. It seemed an age several ages since he had last seen the familiar things in them. During the few days which had elapsed since his hurried setting off to meet Bassett Oliver, so many things had happened that he felt as if he had lived a week in a totally different world. He had met death and mystery and what appeared to be sure evidence of deceit and cunning, and perhaps worse fraud and crime blacker than fraud. But he had also met Audrey Greyle. and it was only natural that he thought more about her than of the strange atmosphere of mystery which wrapped itself around Scarhaven. She, at any rate, was good to think upon, and he thought much as he looked over the letters that had accumulated, changed his clothes, and made ready to go and dine at his club. Already he was counting the hours which must elapse before he would go back to her. Nevertheless, Copplestone's mind was not entirely absorbed by this pleasant subject. The events of the day and of the arrival in London kept presenting themselves, and coming across a fellow club member whom he knew for a thorough man about town, he suddenly plumped him with a question. "I say," he said, "do you know the Fragonard Club?" "Of course," replied the other man. "Don't you?" "Never even heard of it till this evening," said Copplestone. "What is it?" "Mixed lot," answered his companion. "Theatrical and music hall folk men and women, both. Lively spot, sometimes. Like to have a look in when they have one of their nights?" "Very much," assented Copplestone. "Are you a member?" "No, but I know several men who are members," said the other. "I'll fix it all right. Worth going to when they've what they call a house dinner Sunday night, of course." "Thanks," said Copplestone. "I suppose membership of that's confined to the profession, eh?" "Strictly," replied his friend. "But they ain't at all particular about their guests. You'll meet all sorts of people there, from judges to jockeys, and millionairesses to milliners." Copplestone was still wondering what the Squire of Scarhaven could have to do with the Fragonard Club when he went to Mr. Petherton's office the next morning. He was late for the appointment which Gilling had made, and when he arrived Gilling had already reported all that had taken place the day before to the solicitor and to Sir Cresswell Oliver. And on that Copplestone produced the papers entrusted to him by Mr. Dennie, and they all compared the handwritings afresh. "There's certainly something wrong somewhere," remarked Petherton, after a time. "However, we are in a position to begin a systematic inquiry. Here," he went on, drawing a paper from his desk, "is a cablegram which arrived first thing this morning from New York, from an agent who has been making a search for me in the shipping lists. This is what he says: Marston Greyle, St. Louis, Missouri, booked first class passenger from New York to Falmouth, England, by S.S. Araconda, September 28th, 1912. There that's something definite. And the next thing," concluded the old lawyer, with a shrewd glance at Sir Cresswell, "is to find out if the Marston Greyle who landed at Falmouth is the same man whom we have recently seen." CHAPTER XVI